Welcome to the Quiet Coyote. We will be reading Born Again. East Coast summers in the deep Blue Ridge were as close as any of them liked to come to a rainforest. Even as they had set up their camp in a clearing around an old ranger station, it was not what they had intended. The forest, dense beyond reasoning, the giant redwoods above the thick fir trees made life on the ground dark even in midday. It also made the air choking and stagnant. The area around the tower, 100 yards cleared in all directions, to an 11-foot high, thick wire fence. The gates were closed for now, and those that chose to leave a place of sanctuary, as the group had done, were forced to sleep in musty tents on hard ground. The air smells heavily of pine sap, humid and unmoving. Cicadas fiddle and birds chirp, which to some is rather calming, to others an obnoxious racket that can no longer be snoozed. The fire had burned down to white-hot coals a half hour before the morning fog settled in. Thicker than the air, it hangs in cottony webs to the trees and scrub brush. Dog, on the final rung of the ample, tall ladder which leads up to the overlook, drops the last few inches with a wet thud. Hank, looking only somewhat less disheveled than usual, and comical as his frizzled hair holds a few straw bits and leaves, takes a handful of tinder, pushing it into the coals, above which a grate had been set upon rocks, and Hank put a kettle on with water for coffee. It is still terribly dark as Dog sits on the stump in front of a stretched rack. With a curved stone edge, he begins again to clear flecks of skin from a gigantic pelt, nearly having a tear in his eye, while the other slowly flashes a golden glow like a warning light on the wide edge of a highway. He takes his time, running his fingers over the hide. He can almost feel the warmth of life it had. Then, setting his emotions aside, he pockets the scraper, opening a lid to a hole he had dug. He pulls out a piece of meat, walking it to the fire and throwing it on the grate. It sizzles. He doesn't appear in the greatest of moods, which even Dean would give him clearance. However, being emotionally upset seems to be his demeanor. Meanwhile, Adrian emerges from his triangled tarp. He stretches his back. The muscles ache as he rolls his shoulders, taking a deep breath before dropping to the ground and beginning a workout routine. And there's good old Hank, awake before the dawn, keeping his squinty eye out, for he can barely make out shapes in the fog. The first few mornings were the worst. He hasn't woken from the nightmares of loving kisses or small hands trying to scare him. Only the cold steel of the bat that lay in his arms greeted him. So, he made preparations for coffee. However, the smell of the charring meat makes his eyes open a bit wider. What's for breakfast today? His voice is like gravel rubbing together in a plastic bottle. Morning, sunshine. Dog hands Hank a cigarette. Breakfast is dog today. The man, also named Dog, pours the coffee into a mug and hands it to Hank, then pouring his own.
Well, I've eaten worse, let me tell you.
Hank trails off, turning his head towards the rack and the giant pelt.
Wait, you that dog?
Yep. Dog looks at the meat on the grate, sprinkling some herbs on it, and then with bare hands flipping it over. The hunk is a good 10 inches thick and red, muscled, a foot long, while only being 3 to 4 inches wide. He doesn't like to waste anything. And even if he was joking, his dry nature threw shade on the suggestion, and it makes Hank choke on his coffee.
Well, better than a diaper sandwich, I suppose.
Hank says with his normal delivery. However funny it may have sounded, Doc is sure there is no joke to it. He sighs, lighting a cigarette. Everybody else still asleep? Me. Aside from Shepard, he's just up for his watch now. Dog seems to ignore the complexity of Hank, as Hank is quite mad, having his life on the streets an insanity. Adrian exhales loudly, finishing up his morning workout, bouncing up and down on his feet. Helena emerges from the tarp, having woken just after Adrian left. And she is a sight. Her presence makes the fire spring to life, the sudden burst of heat making the meat blacken from this same heat in a wave spreads out, clearing the fog to the fence line. Now, with firelight, her body is clear as day. A tapestry, all manner of human skin and tone and shape and shade, stitched together with the long black locks of her own hair. She is a pure child of hell, still sweet as any good woman can be, and a strange but fitting concubine for Adrian. Adrian being the farthest from a saint as anyone can get, even farther than Helena. Yet he stood with them on many occasions, on more protecting them, even saving lives while ending others. He's the coldest one of all. Before all the world comes crashing down, he grew up in the home with his father, a murdering, raping psychopath. And until he was 19, he was just the same. At 19, he and his father were arrested. And until then, his world was blood. He'd come on the trip, through the mountain, to get away from Philip, his little brother and the source of his 12 years in prison. Hank, Dog, and Adrian look at Helena. They are all used to seeing her without clothes, as she preferred not to have any. However, today, due to no amount of cold, she puts a sheer drape over her shoulders before latching onto Adrian.